So thanks, Professor Lee, and also I would like to express my sincere gratitude to for the kind invitation from the Research Institute for Bilingual Learning and Teaching. Okay, so let me share my screen first. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the syntax-semantics interface of fuzzy quantifiers in Mandarin Chinese and English. Okay, so actually this is a preliminary extension of my PhD study, which is about fuzzy quantifiers in Mandarin Chinese. Okay, and the current research was partially supported by the Young Scholar Scheme from School of Foreign Languages and Literature at Shandong University. Okay. So first, I would like to briefly introduce the outline of today's presentation. Okay, so first I will briefly introduce the background of the study and then the proposals for the current research. And also we have conducted corpus analysis to analyze the syntactic and also the semantic features of the fuzzy quantifiers in both English and Chinese. And then we have conducted several empirical experiments by means of questionnaires. Okay, and then we will move on to the theoretical implications. And finally, I will generalize some conclusions. Okay. Okay, so first, let's move on to the background of this study. So for the concept or the term fuzzy quantifier, so here it is just used as a generalized term, which refers to quantifiers with fuzzy semantic boundaries in natural language. For example, we have in Mandarin Chinese, we have words like 多 and 少, well, and also for 很多 and 很少. Well, in English, we have the words like many and few. Well, for many and few in English, it is they are argued to be adjectives or determinants, with both appearing in the pronominal positions. For example, as shown in 1 and 2. So, for as in example 1, many people are injured. So here, and also few people are injured. Both many and few appear or function as the attributive or as the determinant. Okay, and for the second clause, he bought many books, and also both many and few function as the determinant modifying objects. And also, they are indicated to perform an ambiguity between the modifier type and the quantifier type of expression. And then Petit further claims that many of you can give the cardinal or the proportional rating as shown in 3 and 4. So for example, like many, as shown in 3, many aspens burned. So for its cardinal rating is shown in 3A, which means that the intersection of two sets, that is set A and set B, is larger than cardinal number n. While for the proportional rating, it can be interpreted as in 3B, that is the intersection of two sets, that is set A and set B. When the intersected set is compared with the background set A, the results will give a proportion of the fraction that is larger than K. And also similar interpretation can be found in few, that is the cardinal number for the intersection of set A and set B is smaller than n, while for the proportional rating that is compared with the background set A, the intersection is smaller than the fraction k. Okay, and then many and few are indicated to perform an ambiguity between the modifier type and also the quantifier type of expression. And then Petit further claims that many and few can give the cardinal or the proportional rating. So for the cardinal many and few, as shown in 5A, they appear as either adjectives or determinants. And also for the proportional many and few, as shown in 5B, they function as determinants only. Okay. Well, for Mandarin Chinese, fuzzy quantifiers such as 多, 少, and also 很多 and 很少 are argued to demonstrate asymmetric syntactic distributions with different morphosyntactic properties as shown in the 4 syntheses in 6 and 7. Okay, so for example 6, 多 and 少, for 6A, 多人受伤, it is highly acceptable for native speaker of Mandarin Chinese. While for 6B, 少人受伤, it is not highly acceptable or can be taken as unacceptable for native speakers of Mandarin Chinese. While for 7A and 7B, for 7A, 很多人受伤 it is highly acceptable. While for 7B 很少人受伤 it is kind of odd to native speakers or can be taken as marginally acceptable. Okay, so based on this background, then we propose several proposals for the current study. So first, fuzzy quantifiers in Chinese and English perform different grammatical patterns and also syntactic distributions. So for English fuzzy quantifiers, such as many and few, they demonstrate symmetric properties in most cases, while for those in Chinese, such as 多少 and also 很多 and 很少, they generally perform asymmetric syntactic distributions. Well, for their semantic interpretations, for Chinese and English fuzzy quantifiers, they perform various tendencies in their semantic ratings. So for many and few, they can give the cardinal or proportional rating, with the former as either adjective or determiner and the later determiner only. Well, for the fuzzy quantifiers in Mandarin Chinese, the interpretations of 很多 and 很少 and also 多 and 少 are determined by a diversification among grammatical properties, which leads to a natural tendency to the cardinal rating and the proportional rating. Okay, so in order to further verify the proposals, so we conducted corpus analysis with the hypothesis that first, for English fuzzy quantifiers, such as many and few, they generally perform symmetric syntactic distributions, while for those in Mandarin Chinese, they generally perform asymmetric syntactic properties. Okay, so we adopted the corpus of contemporary American English, which is shortened as COCA, and the Center for Chinese Linguistics Peking University corpus, which is known as CCL corpus, to collect the raw data. And finally, we have collected around 1,500 sentences containing these three pairs of words. Okay, and then let's move on to the preliminary findings from the corpus. Okay, so first, for many, okay, as shown in the table 3.1, so the grammatical functions of many, as we found in the COCA, so most of the cases of many function as the determiner, with its proportion being around 89%, in which many modifies subjects and objects. Okay, for example, like sentence 8, many musicians are familiar with the phenomenon. Okay. And then as shown in the blue box, the proportion of many functioning as a pronoun in the subject or object position appears as the second highest among the proportion of other functions, which is around 9%. For example, like many have left their homes without enough time to grab a change of clothes. Okay, and then let's move on to the findings for few, as shown in table 3.2. So as we can find in the red box, so few functions primarily as the determiner, modifying subjects and objects with its proportion being around 91%. For example, like few studies have examined this question. Okay. Well, for the blue box, it shows that the proportion of few functioning as a pronoun appears as the second highest one among the proportions of other functions. For example, like few are intuitive in communicating skill to non-expert. Okay, so when we compare the results in table 3.1 and 3.2, we can generalize that many and few perform symmetric distributions in their grammatical functions. That is, they perform similar grammatical functions as determiner and also as pronouns. Okay, and then for 多 and 少 in Mandarin Chinese, as we found from the CCL corpus, as shown in table 3.3. So for 多 here, as shown in the red table, so most cases of 多 here functions as the attributive adjective, modify subjects and objects, with its proportion being around 49%. Okay, for example, like 他们见过多次. And then from the blue box, it shows that the proportion of 多 functioning as an adverb, as in 13, 你应该多吃蔬菜, and the predicative adjective, as in 14, 他的朋友多, appear as the second and the third highest ones among the proportion of other functions, with their proportion being around 13% and 14%. Okay. While for 少, as shown in table 3.4, so 少 functions primarily as an adverb, as in 15. 你应该少吃冰淇淋. Okay. And the predicative adjective, as in 16, 医院人手少. Okay. So with their proportions being around 30%. And also we argue that when 少 gives functions as an adverb, it gives the rating of English less frequently, okay, rather than few. And also the proportion of 少 functioning as verb appears as the third highest one among the proportions of other functions as shown in the blue table. Okay. For example, like 实验少了一个重要步骤. Okay, so here we argue that 少 gives the rating of English lack with its verbal use. Well, for the attributive use of 少, it is found that the proportion of 少 functioning as an attributive adjective is not as prominent as that of 多, which is argued to be marginally accepted. For example, for the sentence 18, 他们见过多次, it is highly acceptable for native speakers. But for 少, 他们见过少次, it is not acceptable. Okay. Well, for the cases in the restricted ones that is acceptable for 少 as an attributive adjective, which is shown as in 19, 他收集了少量信息. Okay, so this is one of the acceptable cases for 少 being the attributive adjective, but the number is restricted. And also we found that this kind of constitute this kind of lexicalized or kind of fixed terms for Chinese, for example, like 少量, 少数, or 少人, and so on and so forth. Okay. And so when we compare table 3.3 and 3.4, we can further conclude that 多 and 少, they perform asymmetric distributions in their grammatical functions, okay, which is different from those for English. Okay. And then we also investigated the use of 很多 and 很少 from the CCL corpus, as shown in table 3.5. So the red box shows that most cases of 很多 function as the attributive adjective, modifying subjects and also objects. For example, like 很多人吃了苹果. Okay. While for the blue box, it shows that the proportion of 很多 functioning as a predicative adjective appear as the second highest one among the proportions of other functions. For example, like 测验的种类很多. And also the proportion, and then so much for 很多, and then we move on to the analysis for 很少. So for 很少, as shown in the red table, the proportion of 很少 appearing as an adverb is considerably higher than that of other functions. For example, like 他很少吃汉堡. And we argue that 很少 gives the rating of English rarely with its verbal use rather than few. And also, as shown in the blue box, 很少 as a predicative adjective shows the second highest proportion among other functions. For example, like 相关文献很少. While for the attributive use of 很少, the proportion of 很少 functioning as an attributive adjective is not as prominent as that of 很多, which is argued to be marginally accepted. Okay. And when 很少 appears in the sentence initial positions, there seems to be a covert existential verb 有 between 很少 and the subject. For example, like in 24, 很少儿童喜欢动物. But for native speakers, there seems to be a covert existential verb 有 between 很少 and the 儿童. Then this sentence will be interpreted as 很少有儿童喜欢动物. So with this covert 有 很少 will serve as an adverb modifying the verb 有 rather than an attributive adjective modifying the subject. Okay, and when we compare table 3.5 with 3.6, we can further find that 很多 and 很少 they perform asymmetric distributions in their grammatical functions. Okay, so based on the corpus analysis, then we can come up to the interim summary from corpus as shown in or as summarized in table 3.7. So from this table, we can find that for many and few, or for fuzzy quantifiers in English, they usually perform symmetric syntactic distributions with their dominant functions as determiners or pronouns. While for those in Mandarin Chinese, the story is more complex. Okay. And also, as from our corpus, so the main use of Mandarin few are determiners. Well, according to the studies from Petit, the attributive use is also possible for Mandarin few when they express the cardinal rating. And also for the use of 多少, 很多很少 as determinants will be further verified by our experimental investigations. Okay. And also this corpus findings suggest that neither 多 and 少 nor 很多 and 很少 can be taken as equivalents of many and few because of the adverbial use of 多少 and 很多 of 多少 and 很少 and also the restricted attributive use of 少 and 很少. And because 很多 and 很少 show asymmetric syntactic distribution and perform diverse morphosyntactic properties in their attributive and also adverbial use, so we further verify them by means of sentence judgment tasks in the following empirical investigations. Okay, and then let's move on to section 4, which is about empirical evidences from questionnaires. So we conducted the investigation by based on 4 research questions. So the first one, do 很多 and 很少 perform diverse morphosyntactic properties among the functions that we have collected from the corpus findings? And second question, when 很少 appears in the sentence initial positions, does it serve as an attributive adjective or an adverb? Okay, that is about the covert existential verb yield. And question 3 and 4, or question C and D, they are about the semantic interpretations about 很多 and 很少. So first, does ambiguity exist in the semantic interpretations of 很多 and 很少 between the cardinal rating and the proportional rating, as proposed in those of many and few? And the second question, do various morphosyntactic properties in 很多 and 很少 affect their semantic interpretations, which is about the syntax-semantics mapping for these 2 words? Okay, and we use the online questionnaire as the instrument, and also we invited 17 native speakers of Mandarin Chinese as the participants. Okay, and then let's move on to the design and also the preliminary results for these 4 tasks. Okay, so for task 1, it is designed to evaluate the acceptability of sentences in which 很多 and 很少 perform different functions. And we use a 5-point Likert scale, and there are 2 factors. So for factor 1, they are the 2 fuzzy quantifiers, that is 很多 and 很少. And also for factor 2, we have 8 levels, that they are the 8 positions of fuzzy quantifiers in sentences. In which 很多 and 很少 perform different grammatical functions. And the target sentences were designed by revising 6 basic sentential structures. Okay, and then let's move on to the results and discussion for task 1. Okay, as shown in table 4.2. So here are the 8 conditions for 很少, as shown in the 3rd column. Okay, so 很少 here functions as different grammatical properties. Okay, it can modify subjects, modify objects, and so on and so forth. So from this table, it suggests that 很少 primarily functions as an adverb and a predicative adjective, as shown from the result of condition 1, in which 很少 appears as an adverb modifying the existential verb yield, and also for that of condition 7 and 8, for the adverbial use and the predicative use of 很少. Those are the primary functions of 很少. While for 很多, the results are different, as shown in condition 9 to 16. Okay. So 很多 here mainly serves as an attributive adjective and a predicative adjective, as shown in the results of condition 10, 11, and also 13, 14, and 16. Okay, so when we compare the results of these 2 tables, it further suggests that 很多 and 很少 demonstrate asymmetric syntactic distributions. And then in order to further compare the acceptability of 很少 and 有 and NP and also 很少 and in different positions, that is in sentence initial positions or in object positions, we further conducted task 2, which is based on forced choices. So there are 3 factors, and factor 1 is fuzzy quantifiers. That is 很多 and 很少. And also there are 2 positions to be tested. That first is sentence initial positions, and second is object positions. And the third factor is whether the structure or the targeted structure is with the existential verb you or not. Okay. And also the target sentences were designed by revising 6 basic sentential structures. Okay, and then let's move on to the results. Okay, so the results suggest that the structure of 很少 and 有 and NP, as shown in 26, 很少有人用现金 is far more acceptable than the structure of 很少 and N in sentence initial positions, as in 47, 很少人用现金. Okay, that is to say, the structure with the covert with the existential verb 有 is far more acceptable than the kind of 很少 and NP structure in the sentence initial positions. And also, we found that the attributive use of 很少 modifying objects, as in 28, 人们用很少现金 is just marginally acceptable for native speakers, with its proportion being around 39%. Okay, so when compared with its dominant adverbial use, so the attributive use of 很少 can be taken as restricted in Mandarin Chinese. Okay, and based on the findings from task 1 and task 2, so we generalized the morphosyntactic properties of both 很多 and 很少 in table 4.5. Okay, so as from this table, we can see that 很多 and 很少 perform diverse morphosyntactic properties and also asymmetric syntactic distributions. Okay, and then in task 3 and task 4, we further investigated the semantic interpretations of 很多 and 很少. So for the theoretical motivations for these 2 tasks are come from the studies or previous studies for English fuzzy quantifiers, man and few. So as we have introduced in the background, so they are generally taken to be a contrastive pair with similar morphosyntactic properties and also syntactic distributions. And according to Petit, man and few are ambiguous between the cardinal rating and the proportional rating as repeated in 29 and 30, with the former as either an adjective or determiner, while the later determiner only. Okay. Well, for Chinese 很多 and 很少, in previous studies, they are generally taken to be counterparts of English man and few. That is to say, 很多 is the counterpart of many, while 很少 is the counterpart of few in several previous studies. But the results from our task 1 and task 2 suggest that they demonstrate asymmetric syntactic distributions. Therefore, we come up with the hypothesis that, unlike man and few, the interpretations of 很多 and 很少 are not determined by the symbol ambiguity between an attributive adjective and a determiner, but a diversification among attributive adjective, a predicative adjective, an adverb, and also a determiner, which leads to various tendencies to the common rating and the proportional rating. So in this task, or in task 3, we want to investigate the semantic interpretations of 很多 and 很少 when they perform different grammatical functions. Okay, and also we use the forced choices. And also there are 3 factors for this task. So factor 1 are the 2 fuzzy quantifiers, and factor 2 are the 3 different functions for 很多 and 很少 in the target sentences. For example, like attributive adjective modifying subjects and those modifying objects, and also being the predicative adjective. Okay, and also the factor 3, we gave 3 candidate interpretation for 很多 and 很少. That is the cardinal rating, the proportional rating, and also the ambiguity. Okay, and also the target sentences were designed by revising 7 basic sentential structures. Okay, so here is an example in task 3. So we will give the participants a sentence like in 27. 很多学生思考问题. And there are three options for them to choose. For option one, when compared with a certain number of students, the proportion of students who think about questions is high. So this represents the proportional rating, which shows the comparison with the intersection of two sets with the background set. Okay. Well, for option B, a large number of students think about questions without considering a total number of students, that is, without considering the background set, which represents the cardinal rating. Well, for option C, both A and B are acceptable, which shows that this sentence is ambiguous between the cardinal rating and the proportional rating. Okay, and then let's move on to the results from task 3. Okay, so when 很少 appears before subjects like 很少学生思考问题. Okay, so for this type of sentences, the results show that the proportion of the proportional rating is significantly higher than that of the cardinal rating. And the possible account for this kind of finding is that 很少学生 here actually forms a QP rather than NP. Okay, with 很少 here functions functioning as a dequantifier rather than an attributive adjective. Okay, and also this argument is in accordance with Paul's claim in 2021 that the case of 很少人 is marginally acceptable, whereas the existential construction 很少有人 is more acceptable, as in 33. 很少有人吃苹果. Okay, according to Paul, when the existential verb 有 is covert, so 很少人 here can form a QP, and its distribution is limited compared with 很多人. And so for this claim, it also supports our argument that 很少 combines with the NP to form a QP in sentencing initial positions, thereby licensing the preference for the proportional rating. Okay, and the result of task 3 are generalized in table 4.7. Okay. And from this table, it shows that 很多人很少 demonstrates diverse tendencies in their semantic interpretations. So for 很多, the cardinal rating appears as its dominant rating because its dominant use is of attributive adjective. Well, the cardinal rating for 很少 is kind of restricted. Well, for the proportional rating can be taken as its dominant rating for its adverbial use, which is further verified by some other empirical evidences. Okay. And then in task 4, we further investigated whether the proportional rating is the dominant rating for both 很多 and 很少 when they appear as dequantifiers attached to topicalized NPs. And also we use the forced choices, and we have 3 factors in task 4. And the different factor compared with task 3 is the second one, that is the functions. The 3 functions for 很多 and 很少 in the sentences are the 很多 and 很少 attached to topicalized NPs and as predicative adjective, and also attached to topicalized to the constituent that is ambiguous between the topic and subject. Okay. And also the target sentences were designed by revising 10 basic sentential structures. Okay, and then let's move on to the results for this task. Okay, so the results show that the preference for the proportional rating occurs when 很多 and 很少 combine with topicalized NP. So the proportional rating here is licensed by the topic feature in the head position of TP, which is a position simulating QP. And when attached to topicalized NP, 很多 and 很少 appear as dequantifiers, which carries the Q feature. Okay. Okay, and then we combine the findings from task 3 and task 4. Okay, we can further generalize the semantic interpretations of 很多 and 很少 as shown in table 4.9. So the diverse syntactic distributions in both these 2 words among different functions may lead to various tendencies in their semantic interpretations. So for 很多, the cardinal rating tends to be its dominant rating, regardless of whether it appears as an attributive adjective, modifying subjects or objects. While the preference for the proportional rating is restricted in 很多 as a dequantifier or as a predicative adjective in restricted cases. While for 很少, according to our further analysis and further empirical investigation, the proportional rating is preferred in 很少, which appears in its dominant adverbial use. And also, it is possible when 很少 functions as a dequantifier or as a predicative adjective in restricted cases. Well, for the dominant cardinal rating on the par with 很多 is taken to be restricted in 很少 for its limited attributive use in Mandarin Chinese. Okay, so much for the empirical evidences or empirical findings from questionnaires. And then we will move on to the theoretical implications or theoretical analysis for the semantic and also syntactic properties of 很多 and 很少. So for this section, we will have 3 subsections. So for section 1, we will focus on the morphosyntactic properties of 很多 and 很少. And for section 2, we will focus on the semantic interpretations of these 2 words. And for section 3, we will try to generalize the syntax and semantics mapping of these 2 words. And then we will further assume the tendency shown in many, few, and also those for 多 and 少. Okay, so first, let's focus on the morphosyntactic properties of 很多. So as we have generalized from the corpus analysis and also from the empirical investigations, 很多 primarily functions as an attributive adjective and also predicative adjective. So when appearing as an attributive adjective, 很多 here can modify subjects and also objects as shown in 36. 很多学生看过这本书. Okay, so its syntactic structure is shown in 36b. So for 很多 here, it functions as a modifier combining with the noun 学生 with the NP projected, appearing as either a subject or an object. Okay, and also we found that the attributive 很多 can be followed by the modificational marker 的 to form the structure of 很多的 NP, as shown in 37. 很多的学生邀请了我. Okay, so here 很多 functions as modifier in the spec position of the DP, with 的 as the head and NP as the complement. And so this finding is consistent with Masters' claim that 很多 is more of a modified type than a quantifier when followed by the modificational marker 的. Okay. Well, apart from modified subjects and objects, 很多 can also function as a dequantifier combining with the topicalized NP as shown in 33a. 很多学校来了家长. So here, 很多 and NP gives a QP as shown in 38b. Okay, as shown here, with 很多 being a dequantifier and the DP is projected. Okay, so much for 很多, and then for 很少. So it is found that 很少mainly functions as an adverb and a predicative adjective. Okay, while for the adverbial modification in 很少, it can be realized in 2 ways. So first, 很少 can modify the way P to which it attaches as shown in 41. 那个老师很少批评学生. And also 很少 can modify the existential verb 有 as in 42. 很少有老师批评学生, and usually in the sentence initial positions. And the dominant adverbial use suggests that 很少 mainly serves as a quantifier and gives the rating on the par with English rarely rather than few. Well, for the attributive use of 很少, it is taken to be restricted or limited in Mandarin Chinese. Okay, so the restriction may be attributed to the definiteness effect on subjects in Mandarin Chinese. That is to say, under the attributive modification, 很少 shows the preference for the weak cardinal rating as we found from our empirical study, which suggests that 很少 appears as a weak quantifier when it modifies nouns. However, as Milsa claimed in 1977, weak quantifiers usually show indefinite properties. Therefore, 很少 performs indefinite properties when it modifies nouns, and therefore it can hardly satisfy the definiteness effect on subject in Mandarin Chinese. Okay. And the acceptability of 很少 and NP in the sentence initial positions can be improved or further improved by the covert appearance of the existential verb 有 between 很少 and NP, shown in 43, which is a sentence that we have discussed before. 很少人用现金 or 很少有人用现金. So when the verb 有 appears, 很少 here will functions as an adverb modifying 有, giving the rating of English rarely rather than few. Okay, and in addition, 很少 NP can also appear as a QP in the sentence initial position, with 很少 serving as a quantifier instead of a modifier. And then it gave the structure gives a proportional rating. Okay, moreover, the modification marker de is also required by the attributive 很少 to form the structure of 很少的 NP, as shown in 44. 很少的人认识它. Okay, so the modification marker de here also serves as the head of DP, and NP here appears as a complement, and 很少 functions as a modifier appearing in the spec position of the DP. And also for this kind of structure, it can be preceded by the adverb 只 or 只有, as in 45. 只有很少的人认识它. So with this kind of structure with 只有, the acceptability of the attributive modification in 很少 is argued to be further improved. Okay, so much for the restricted attributive use of 很少. And also 很少 can function as a de-quantifier, which can be realized in two ways. So first, 很少 can be combined with subject NP, as in 46. 很少人吃了苹果. Okay, so here 很少 functions as a de-quantifier with a DP being projected. And also, the 很少 as a de-quantifier is possible when it combines with topicalized NP, as in 47. 很少学校来了家长. Okay, so syntax structure is shown in 47b, and also here is also a DP being projected. Okay, so based on the theoretical analysis, then we can generalize the morphosyntactic properties of 很多 and 很少. So for 很多, it mainly functions as the attributive adjective, a determiner, and also the predicative adjective. While for 很少, it mainly functions as an adverb or an a quantifier, or as a predicative adjective. And also it performs restricted functions as the attributive adjective and also as determiner. Okay, and then we will move on to the semantic analysis of 很多 and 很少 to see the different tendencies shown in their semantic ratings. Okay, so first for 很多. Okay, as 很多 primarily functions as an attributive adjective, so the cardinal rating appears as its dominant rating, regardless of whether 很多 modifies subjects or objects, to denote the meaning that the intersection of two sets is larger than the cardinal number n, as shown in example 49. 很多人付了钱, so the cardinal rating can be interpreted in 49b, which gives the rating that the intersection of two sets, that is, a person who pay money, is larger than the cardinal number n. Okay, and 很多 here is argued to be of the modifier type when expressing the cardinal rating. Okay, and also the preference for the proportional rating is found to be restricted in 很多, and it appears when 很多 functions as a de-quantifier. Okay, so when 很多 and NP is licensed by the topic feature, and then a tripartite structure is shown in 50 for proportional rating is triggered, with 很多 serving as the operator here. And the preference for the proportional rating is possible. Okay, for example, like 51. 很多学校来了家长. Okay, so tripartite structure is showing 51b, with 很多 being the operator. And its proportional rating can be interpreted in 51c. Okay, that is to say, when comparing the intersection of two sets, that is school to which parents come, with the background set that is a certain number of school as determined contextually. So the results will give a proportional percentage that is larger than the fraction k. Okay, so in this structure, 很多 is of the quantifier type, and 很多 and NP here forms a QP. And this QP is projected due to the semantics of 很多 as a D quantifier, which carries a Q feature. And the topic feature is to ensure that there exists a definite set satisfying the restrictor part of the tripartite structure. And also when 很多 NP is licensed by the topic feature in the head position of TP, so 很多 here appears as a D quantifier. Hence the preference for the proportional rating is possible in sentence like 51. Okay, while for 很少, okay, so as argued from Guo and Yu in 2012, 很少 as an A quantifier, it can express the proportional quantification. And as 很少 primarily functions as an A quantifier, so the proportional rating is argued to be its dominant rating. And given that the adverbial modification can be realized in two ways, so the nuclear scope in the tripartite structure are different for these two conditions. For the first one, the VP to which 很少 attaches, and secondly, it can be the existential verb you, as shown in example 52 and 53 respectively. Okay, so for 52, it shows the condition in which 很少 modifies the VP to which it attaches. For example, like 那个老师很少批评学生. Okay, so for this sentence, it can be interpreted in the context for students and teachers in the classroom. And the tripartite structure is shown in 42B, and with 很少 being the operator. And its proportional rating can be interpreted in 52C. That is to say, when the set of situation, which includes that teacher and students, intersected with the set of situation, in which that teacher criticized students, with the intersected set compared with the background set, or the set of situation which include that teacher and students, the results will give a fraction or percentage that is smaller than K, which is also a fraction here. Okay, that is the first condition for the adverbial 很少. Well, for the second condition for the adverbial 很少, it can modify the existential verb you in sentence initial positions as in 53. 很少有老师批评学生. And for this sentence, it is also interpreted in the context of students and teachers in the classroom. And its tripartite structure is shown in 53B, with 很少 being the operator. Okay, and its proportional rating can be interpreted in 53C. That is when the set of situation, which includes teachers and students, intersected with the set of situation in which there exists a teacher who criticizes students, with the intersected set compared with the background set. That is a set of situation which includes teachers and students. The results will give a fraction or the percentage that is smaller than K. Okay, those are two different ways that 很少 functions as adverbs according to our empirical and also theoretical analysis. Okay, and also the preference for the proportional rating is possible for 很少 when the QP is projected in the sentence initial positions as shown in 54. 很少人付了钱. Okay, and also here 很少 functions as an operator, and its proportional rating is given in 54C. That is when we're comparing the two sets, that is when the intersection of the set A, that is person who pay money, with set B. Okay, when we compare this intersection with the background set, that is a certain number of people of person as determined contextually, it will give a number or a percentage that is smaller than the fraction K. And also the preference for the proportional rating is possible when the topic phrase or the TP is projected in sentence initial positions. For example, like 很少学校来了家长. Okay, so its proportional rating is given in 55C. That is when comparing the intersection of two sets, that is schools to which parents came, with the background set that is a certain number of schools as determined contextually. The result will give a fraction or percentage that is smaller than K. Okay, And also when denoting the proportional rating, 很少 functions as a quantifier instead of a modifier. Okay. Well, for the attributive use of 很少, it is found to be marginally acceptable. And the cardinal rating is argued to be restricted, and which appears when it modifies subjects or objects as shown in 56 and 57 respectively. So for 56, 很少家长来了. Okay, so for the cardinal rating, it shows that the intersection of two sets, that is parents who came, is smaller than the cardinal number n. Okay, while for 57, in which 很少 modifies object, 他们付了很少钱. Also here, it gives a rating of 57b. The cardinal rating is that the intersection of two sets, that is the money that they paid, is smaller than the cardinal number n. Well, for the cardinal rating, it suggests that 很少 functions as a weak quantifier denoting indefinite properties under its attributive modification, and can hardly satisfy the definiteness effect on subjects in Mandarin Chinese. Therefore, its attributive modification of subjects is marginally acceptable, as we have discussed in the morphosyntactic analysis of the attributive use of 很少. And also, we have focused on the expected value for the value judgment of both 很多 and 很少, and they can be taken as vague and context dependent. For example, when we compare these two sentences for 58, 房子里开着很多门 or 房子里开着很少门. And also 59, 学校来了很多学生 or 学校来了很少学生. So for native speakers, they may regard 3 to 5 doors as 很多 for 58. That is for men. Well, take 300 to 500 students as 很多 for 59. That is for 学生. And similarly, they will regard 1 to 2 doors as 很少 for 58. While take 20 to 50 students as 很少 for 59. Therefore, the nouns that follows 很多 and 很少 will affect their value judgment, which suggests that the expected value depends on the context and is vague in nature. Okay, so much for the syntactic and also semantic interpretations and also analysis for 很多 and 很少. And then based on this, the previous two sections, we come up with the syntax and semantics mapping of these two words. So for 很多, as shown in 60, the cardinal rating appears as its dominant rating, which suggests that 很多 is of the modifier type rather than the quantifier type, regardless of whether modified subjects or objects. Well, for the proportional rating, it is taken to be restricted in 很多, and it is possible when 很多 combines with topicalized NP, or 很多 appears as the predicative adjective in restricted cases. Well, for 很少, as generalized in 61, so for the proportional rating, it appears as the dominant rating in 很多. And it is possible when 很多 for 很少, and it is possible for 很少when it functions as an A quantifier, and also when the QP or the TP is projected in the sentence initial positions. While the dominant cardinal rating on the par with 很多 is not possible in 很少, given its restricted function of being an attributive adjective. Okay, so these two diagrams shows the syntax-semantics mapping for 很多 and 很少. Well, for the other two pairs of fuzzy quantifiers, that is first pair, the man and few for English, and also 多 and 少 for Chinese, we made some further assumptions or hypotheses. Okay, so for man and few, it is mainly based on previous studies. Okay, so for as we have discussed or introduced in the background of this study, so for both man and few can give the cardinal or the proportional rating as shown in 62. Okay, with the cardinal man and few appear as either adjectives or determinants as shown in 62a. Okay, while the proportional man and few, they mainly function as determinants only as 62b. So for the cardinal man, the man and few, they are more like modifier type, while for the proportional man and few, they are more like quantifier type. And they perform ambiguity between these two types of expressions. Well, for 多 and 少, okay, so based on the syntax-semantics mapping found in 很多 and 很少, so we assume that there are also some different or asymmetric tendencies shown in 多 and 少. Okay, so for 多 here, both the cardinal rating and the proportional rating appear as the dominant rating of 多. And so when 多 functions as an attributive adjective, it gives the cardinal rating. While the proportional rating emerges when 多 appears as an adverb or a predicative adjective in restricted cases. So for this kind of function, it is unique for 多, which is different from English Mandarin and also for Chinese 很多. Okay, because both Mandarin and 很多 they don't have the adverbial use, but for 多 it has a unique adverbial use. So this is the next step that we need to focus on. Okay. Well, for 少, we argue that the proportional rating appears as the dominant rating in 少, and it is possible when 少 functions as an adverb, and also 少 appears as a predicative adjective in restricted cases. Well, for the cardinal rating, it is argued to be restricted in 少, given its limited function of being an attributive adjective. So therefore, 少 is kind of similar to with 很少. Okay, and from the syntax-semantics mapping, we can generalize that the diverse syntactic properties of 多 and 少 and also 很多 and 很少 may lead to various tendencies in their semantic interpretations. And also, we argue that 很多 and 很少and 多 and 少 are not the contrasted pair as English man and few appear to be, as the stories of 很多 and 很少 and also 多 and 少 are more complicated based on the diversifications demonstrated in both their morphosyntactic properties and also their semantic interpretations. Okay, so based on these findings, then we can generalize some brief conclusions. Okay, so first, for their grammatical patterns and syntactic distributions, as we found from our corpus findings and also our empirical evidence, so fuzzy quantifiers in Chinese and English, they perform different tendencies in grammatical functions or distributions. So for Chinese fuzzy quantifiers, such as 很多 and 很少, and also 多 and 少, they generally perform asymmetric syntactic distributions. While for those in English, such as many and few, that demonstrate symmetric properties in most cases. Well, for their semantic interpretations, various tendencies also found in Chinese and English fuzzy quantifiers. So the interpretation of 很多 and 很少 and also for 多 and 少 are determined by a diversification among different functions or different morphosyntactic properties as we have collected or summarized in our study, which leads to a natural tendency to the cardinal rating and the proportional rating. Well, for English Mandarin and few, they can give the cardinal or proportional rating, with the cardinal Mandarin and few being an adjective or determiner, while the proportional rating can only be the determiner. Okay. And the generalization may lead to an implication that fuzzy quantification notions are denoted differently in English and Mandarin Chinese, at least demonstrated in Mandarin few, 多 and 少, and also 很多 and 很少. So for English fuzzy quantifiers, the semantic components of Mandarin few, they play an essential role in determining their syntactic and also semantic interpretations. Well, for those in Mandarin Chinese, so the syntax-semantics mapping for 很多 and 很少 and also 多 and 少 suggests that syntactic and grammatical components play a crucial role in determining the denotational meaning of Chinese fuzzy quantifiers, which can hardly be overridden by semantics or related meaning components. Okay, so I mean, just stop here, and here are the selected references. And thank you very much for your kind listening, and comments were very welcome.